Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you 5 ways to use your distress inks on your Gelli plate. We're going to go over the inks I'm using, some salvage patina, weathered wood, black soot, antique linen, rusty hinge, and picked raspberry. For my paper, I'm going to be using this watercolor pad. This is from Michaels. It's 90 pound, and I cut each page into quarters, so they were 4.5 by 6 inches each. I have my distress sprayer and mini mister. I've got some textures that I'm going to be using, some tulle, some bubble wrap. I've used all these before, that's why they look dirty or used. This is just crinkled up paper, makes for a great texture. Got a DIY grid texture that I had created. This is an embossing folder over cardstock. Then I've got some stencils. All the stencils I'm using today are Tim Holtz collection, Stampers Anonymous, just from various different sets. Some of them are even Halloween, but I picked out ones that didn't look too creepy. Here I have some script embossed folders and some urban type embossing folders. I've got some decorative pieces like these butterflies from Dollar Tree and this little heart doily, and these other doilies are also from Dollar Tree. Going to use 2 Brayers, the 6-inch and the 2-inch. The 5 techniques we're learning today: 1 is to create a solid or ombre background, 2 is to spritz your background with water, 3 is to create stencils with the blender, frames is number 4, and number 5 is using stamps. So to get started with the solid or ombre background, I'm just putting the 1 solid pink color on, that's the picked raspberry, and I'm brayering it out to get a nice even application of the ink. I'm just using this white scrap piece of paper throughout this entire video, so if it gets dirty, it's just me cleaning off the plate with it. There's enough ink left on the brayer that I don't have to re-ink it. I can just brayer back over it, put my pink paper right back down, and then this way I can get a darker pink color. It is a watercolor paper, so it's not a perfect transfer of the ink. There's some, I guess, texture that keeps the white in there. So if you wanted a really perfect one, you could use a smooth cardstock, and that would definitely give you a nice smooth blend or inked background. So the nice thing I like about using my distress ink and the brayer technique over the gel plate is I really have a hard time getting such smooth blends with my foam tool, and it takes so long to create this ombre effect when I'm using my blender tool right on my paper. To do it on the gel plate, look how quick, I mean, I know I have it sped up, but you can get really quick backgrounds this way. So here I'm just kind of cleaning my plate. I'm pulling off the extra. You can see there's extra ink left on my brayer. Best way I found to kind of clean these up as I'm going along and changing colors is to just use a baby wipe over it. Because the distress inks are all water-based, they don't really dry on the plate or on the brayers, so you do want to clean them off in between. Acrylic paint would end up drying and you could just keep going, so the distress inks are a little more finicky like that. So now that I'm ready to move on to my next print, I'm just going to use some of the rusty hinge and then the fossilized amber. I'm basically going to put all 4 colors on: the pink, the blue, the orange, and the yellow. I'm using my little 2-inch brayer kind of to blend them out, starting with my lightest color. And you'll notice as I got to my blue, I didn't rub off the color enough, so it turned into kind of like a gray color. Next technique is to spritz it with water. So I'm just putting big blobs of water down, and again, this is watercolor paper, so it will be able to handle that water. If you're trying this technique, don't be frustrated if the first time you pull your print it doesn't look that perfect. You can try to fix them by adding different layers to them, as you'll see me do later on in this video, but I would say just stick with it. With this technique, it's something that you want to just keep going. And if maybe you come across one that doesn't turn out, don't let it frustrate you. Just like with regular jelly printing, there will be a few of your prints that you do with distress inks that you probably won't like. Could always use them for like die cut backgrounds or anything like that in a different project. So I'm going to keep going here. This is spritzing with the mini mister this time. And I am pressing pretty firmly on the paper. This is a lighter version of those colors. I'm just taking that gray color off on the edge. And I'm going to let those dry. You can see the difference in the darker tone and the lighter tone, the second generation or ghost print. I'm wiping off my gel plate in between. I'm going to be using some yellow and some salvage patina. I'm just going to do another blend with those two colors. I'm also using my foam blender here just to kind of really smooth out those more rough edges that the brayer leaves behind. Pull in some texture with bubble wrap, spritzing it with water. And then for a second generation one, spritzing it with a little more water and just pulling the second print. Again, I have a lighter version and a darker version, a ghost print, if you will, of the same one. I still have a lot of ink left on my brayer, so I'm just gonna brayer that back over my Gelli Plate. I'm gonna see if I can pull a little texture from this doily. Using the lighter one, I'm just putting it back in the same orientation with the yellow on the top and the blue on the bottom. It's not very noticeable, so it's very subtle. So I decided to take, without inking up anymore, just the same ink over the top of that, do the doilies in a little bit of a different area. And this time I flipped it and went with the yellow on the bottom and the blue on the top. You can see this one looks a lot more green now, and you can see the little bit of texture in those corners. I've used all my bright colors, so for this one I'm going to use my neutral toned colors, so the rusty hinge, the weathered wood, and the black soot, or the orange, the gray, and the black. I'm going to go ahead and blend these out again with my blending tool on the plate, just so I don't have any harsh lines and so that the edges of each color blend together. So this brings me to the third technique, using stencils with your foam blender over the top onto your Gelli Plate. I started light with just the two corners, using a little bit of black soot over the rusty hinge. I wanted a little more texture here with this kind of urban-y weathered wood texture, but I didn't want it to be so perfect, so I peeled away or just ripped away the edges so I'd have a rough edge on all four sides. And then I just used my brayer to remove some of that ink and leave behind the texture. I'm putting more bubble wrap down, and then I'm going to pull this print and see what it's looking like so far. It's a light version, but I really like where it's going. I definitely want to layer on top of this. I start by just spritzing the plate with water and putting the paper right back on top. Just trying to get those colors to blend a little bit. Don't worry, I know it looks like maybe I ruined it, but it all works out in the end. I didn't like how the orange washed out so much, so I did put more orange on the plate. And that brought that color back. Now I'm going to use some more stenciling on my gel plate. Using my black soot here over this, it's kind of I think it's a crackle texture. Spritzing it with a little bit of water before I remove the stencil. And then I just stick my piece of paper right back on top. And you can see that nice texture down there. So I want to do it on the top corner, kind of the opposite corner of where I just was. Gonna do the same thing. I'm not filling out all of the area with the stencil, just some areas and kind of blending them out. This time I did not spritz it before I removed the stencil, and I'm spritzing it after, just to see if that looks any different. I think I like that one better. So there's like 2 corners that I want to fill some stuff in. I'm going to do the little X's on the top right corner. So on my plate, it's the top left corner. And then I'm going to fill out the X's on the bottom right corner. For these, I'm not using the spritz of water. And there you see those transferred pretty nicely. A couple more areas I want to fill in. I have this word stencil. Just remember, if you're using word stencils, just use them backwards because you want them on the gel plate upside down, and then that way when they get transferred to your paper, they'll be the right way. So that's looking good. I just have a couple more areas on the other side I want to fill in just to kind of tie it all together. I'm just using my blender to really get into those grooves. And there you can see all the texture on this background. I think it looks really cool. So here we got this really colorful one, the first one I did, and it definitely needs some love. So using the stencil technique, I am going to dress it up a little bit. I wanted to add some black contrast. As I'm doing these layers, I'm not putting too many stencil designs down before I pull the print, just so I can get an idea of what it looks like. I did clean off my Brayer, I cleaned off my gel plate, and then I added this salvage patina on the crest stencil. It's very colorful because I used alcohol inks on it. I haven't cleaned the alcohol inks off, but they won't mess with your distress inks. Didn't spritz this one before I pulled the print, so I'm spritzing it after just to get some oxidized look with the salvaged patina. Now I'm going to use some weathered wood in the corners and blend those out. Got my grid texture, just a DIY texture that I made. I've got my clocks. This is an embossed cardstock with clocks. For this one, I'm spritzing a little bit of water. I'm just seeing what this one looks like. So this is right over that lighter colorful background. I've got the grays in the corners, and I'm just spritzing them to make those oxidize just a little bit more. I'm going to go in with more of my salvage patina over this crest stencil. This time I'm spritzing it before I remove the stencil. And I'm just figuring out what corner I want that in. There we go, that one looks really nice. Right on top of the light areas, you can see it really well. There's this little spot in the middle. Figured the little heart that I have, that would look good in that spot there. But first I wanted to see, with that salvage patina still on the plate, if I could pull any of that up on this print. It didn't really pull up anything. So I just cleaned my plate. Okay, so I'm going to take some of that picked raspberry just in that center area, just putting it on with my blending brush. I'm taking this little heart die cut that I have, and it's got embossing texture on it. It's from Tim Holtz. I'm removing the design part and just pulling it up. It's very light, but you can see it in the middle there, the little heart with the little flowers around it. I wanted to add some words, so I'm going back in with my word texture stencil. I'm using the weathered wood for this one so it won't be as dark. And I think this one's looking really cool because the initial one that I didn't love it on its own. So adding these layers and building them up really is enhancing how I'm liking these backgrounds. Now I'm going to go in with my black soot and do a few areas with the blender. Taking this word texture that I have from an embossing folder, and I'm just going to layer that right on top of the piece I've been working on. And there we go. I get a little bit of that texture. It's not very obvious, but I like it because the background still shows through very nice. Now I'm going to dress up one of my yellow and blue backgrounds, doing some of the black distress ink on there, removing some of the ink with these clocks, and then I'm putting this tool down. I wasn't sure if this would transfer through, so I just went ahead and put my page down just to see if I get anything through the tool. It didn't pull anything up, so once I removed the tool, I'll put it right back down again. And there you can see it pulled up. It's got a little bit of that texture from the tool. Now I'm deciding what else I want to add on this background piece, cleaning my plate first. I want to do some of this crackle and I guess blobs of paint. Not sure what this other one is. Grunge. Using the rusty hinge here. Then without cleaning my stencil, I just flipped it over and put it right onto my plate, pressed it in, and then put my paper right on top of that to see if I can get any texture. And it worked. I'm going to use some more of these X's with the black. Spritz it. I actually wiped it off and then came back over to the other corner, put the black and spritzed it. I like this because the colors that you're putting on, they're not very dark or super obvious. If I were to put these directly onto my paper from the stencil, it would be very dark, and unless you just didn't put a lot of ink on your blending brush. But I do like how you can really layer up the colors this way without it being overwhelming. So this was a little bit of the salvage patina and the rusty hinge. I'm just going to see if I can pull up any of that on this other background. I wanted to add more of the salvage patina on this piece, so I put the salvage patina in both corners, blended them out, and I'm using the brick texture. I didn't use any water to spritz this one. And you can see them, but I went ahead and spritzed it with my mini mister anyway to oxidize it. So here I'm adding my rusty hinge and my black soot just in the middle, blending those out with my brayer, removing the clock texture. And this brings me to technique number 4, which is using a frame. So I cut that a circle out of a piece of cardstock, put that over my gel plate, and now I was able to pull just the circle frame of my texture. While that ink was still wet inside, I used the 2nd and 3rd generation on different areas of that same background. Here I've got the salvage patina and the rusty hinge that I'm blending out with my blending tool. They were getting blended together, so I was just cleaning them off on my piece of paper. Next, I'm going to use stamps. So you can use your Gelli Plate to make ombre stamp pad almost. So I have the orange and the blue together, spritzed it with some water, and I'm going to stamp those right on top of that pink piece that I made, my first one. Cleaned it off, and then I'm going back in opposite side, doing the same thing, stamping away. So you can stamp from your gel plate onto another piece of paper, or you can use the stamped pieces that are left behind on your gel plate for another print, which is what I'm going to do here, just adding a little bit more texture. I'm blending in the areas where the cardstock made like a rectangle. I'm using my ombre, my second ombre piece that I had made, and I pulled up the salvage patina and the rusty hinge on top of that. You can see it's just a subtle difference because the colors are very similar. Here's where I start messing up my pink one. I went a little crazy with trying to make that one look better. So what I would recommend if you are doing a technique like this, the pink one I had done was already so dark that anything I tried layering on top of just looked muddier and muddier. My lighter ones, the ones that didn't have too much color to start with, then I could layer different colors and textures on top of. Those ones I thought looked a lot better. So for this one, I'm just removing the ink with the blue and orange background. And still seeing if I can manage to save this pink one. It's just getting a little messy. Now I'm spritzing my crest stencil and just laying it on top of my pink background again, just seeing what will happen. I think because of all the texture on the watercolor paper, it left a very fine line, but it wasn't very noticeable. So I did clean my plate. I'm going back in with the rusty hinge and the salvage patina, a little bit of the pink. Just gonna blend those together. Taking my grid texture stamp, removing the stamp and just placing it on my excess sheet over here. And then I put some on one of my backgrounds. And then I have my butterfly. I did decide to spritz it before pulling this print. I would say with this butterfly one, if I hadn't spritzed it, I probably wouldn't have gotten that harsh line around it. So to try to fix that, I removed the butterfly and pressed it down again. It worked pretty well. I just didn't really love how the butterfly had such a harsh line around it. So I'm putting the butterfly back down here with the tool, and this time I'm just brayering the tool on top for the texture. Removing the butterfly. And it came out really light, but you could see a little bit of the butterfly in the middle there. Now I've got some black soot in the weathered wood that I'm kind of blending out on the edges. I'm using that stacked wood piece that I have. More of the clock texture. Spritz it with a little water, and then I'm using a clean piece of watercolor paper. And you can see some texture on this one. A little bit of the colors in the background, really light. Going back to the stamping technique again, this time I'm stamping onto my gel plate with a second generation stamp in between. Taking the one I had just made. And I'm getting a little bit of texture on there. Pulled my flower stamp back out and I used weathered wood. Just gonna stamp that onto my gel plate. And I'm gonna take the pink one with all the colors on it and press that over the top, the one with the butterfly in the middle. I already like how that looks. Gonna add a little more light stamping, blending out the edges of this stamp with my blender tool. And there we go, we're getting some nice texture on here. I'm going to try to do one more thing to this butterfly background piece. I'm doing some of the gray and the black, going along the same technique of the framed one that I did earlier, just blending out these darker colors in the center. Pulling my clock texture. And on my framed piece, I cut 2 other circles out, just to add a little more to my frame. And you can see in those 2 little areas I had a little more of the clock texture come through. I think these are really fun, just different ways to use your gel plate on your and your distressings together. So I've got some really cool backgrounds. Some are more vibrant than others. Some of them are more neutral tone, like this one. I thought this one looked really cool and more grungy. Then there's really bright ones like this one. The colors worked really well together. And here with the frame piece, it adds some interest into the middle, but you can still see that butterfly in the background, just barely. This one, again, has the framed piece. This would make a cool looking card where you can put a sentiment in the center. These colors look great together. I love the contrast of these two together. These are the two that I didn't love. So out of all of those, only two that I would say I would probably just use for scraps or something. But all the rest of them, I really love how they turned out. I love the colors, the way they layered up on the textures. I like how the Gelli Plate just really gives these smooth blends. So if you've never tried using your Gelli Plate and your distress inks together, they're so cool, the different techniques that you can try out. I think it's really cool that you can use your gel plate as like a stamp pad with different colors of inks together to create different stamped images. So many fun techniques to try, and I hope you try one of these out. Let me know if you try something that I didn't list in this video that maybe I need to learn about. I hope you have fun crafting, and thanks for sticking along. See you next time.